Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Today I'm going to demonstrate my pattern for this beautiful Tunisian crochet oval. This pattern is available for free as a PDF from my website using the link in the description. This project is worked using Tunisian crochet simple stitch short rows, and it is worked almost seamlessly in a series of triangular wedges. So in this diagram I've numbered them sequentially, and we'll start by making number 1 and we'll work around from there in order. Wedges 1 to 5, 7 to 12, and 14 are the semicircle wedges, and they're worked identically using forward pass short rows, and they form semicircle ends which radiate out around these red central points. Conversely, wedges 6 and 13 are worked the opposite way, using return pass short rows, and those two are what create the oval shape. Otherwise, we would have a circle. So we're going to learn these techniques all together, and I'll demonstrate everything you need to know to make this. I am using Wool and the Gang's Shiny Happy Cotton to demonstrate this, and I'll be doing a 2-color technique, which I will show you, but you could use pretty much any worsted craft cotton, Dishy, this Loops and Threads product, even Estelle Suds. There are many to choose from. I do recommend a 5mm regular hook and a 6mm Tunisian crochet hook. So we're going to start this project by chaining 25 times, starting with color A, and then we'll introduce color B. So for me, color A is pink and color B is white. We're going to work row 1 by picking up stitches in the back bumps of our chain all the way down the line, starting as we always do in the second bump from the hook. So we're going to pick up 24 Tunisian stitches from these back bumps. So insert under the back bump, yarn over and pull up a loop, keeping all the new loops on the hook as you go down the line. Now I am struggling. This was a poor hook choice for the yarn. It constantly splits. The edges and tip are too sharp, I think, for this soft kind of gently twisted cotton. So eventually I'm going to change hooks. And I'm going to speed this up so that you don't have to watch because it's kind of painful. I'm really struggling. But just pick up 1 stitch in every bump and do that exactly 24 times until you get to the very end of your chain. And when you finish, you might want to count to make sure that you have 25 loops on the hook. Once we have completed this into the last bump, we will work a regular return pass. So for a regular return pass, we yarn over and pull through 1 stitch on the hook, then we yarn over and pull through 2, and do that all the way to the end. Now, the rest of this project, we are always going to be working something called a modified return pass, which is simply where we start by yarning over and pulling through 2 at the very beginning, and we do that all the way down. So we always yarn over, pull through 2. We don't actually work that chain at the beginning of the return pass where we yarn over and just pull through 1 loop. And I do abbreviate that modified return pass as MRET, so you'll see that in the pattern. The other abbreviation I use is TSS, which just stands for Tunisian Simple Stitch. So every time we work a return pass in this project, we will only work until we have 2 stitches remaining on the hook. And that is because we are going to change colors at that point. But before we move on, I just want you to place a marker. And I want you to place it on the Tunisian final stitch of this row that we've just almost completed. So normally we work under the 2 loops of the Tunisian final stitch, so that's where I want you to place the marker. Just turn the work sideways, identify the final 2 loops of that Tunisian final stitch, and place a marker on it. And we will be working into that space for the first 5 wedges of our pattern. So that's an important space to identify. So now I've changed hooks, I'm ready to go. So it's time to change colors before we complete the return pass. Introduce color B, which for me is white. Loop it over the hook, just leave an end long enough to weave in at the end, and then pull it through the last 2 loops. And that actually just completes our return pass, so always remember that. Now we're ready to start row 2, which is our first short row. It consists of just 2 simple stitches. So there's the first one, and there's the second one. So a very short row, 2 stitches. Now work the return pass modified by yarning over and pulling through 2, until you have 2 stitches left on the hook and just snug it down with the yarn tail. Now we change color and complete the return pass with color A by yarning over and pulling through the final 2 stitches. So that finishes the return pass. And just make sure everything is snug. Now row 3 is going to consist of just 4 stitches. So the first one is worked as normal, number 1. Stitch number 2 is going to be worked into the Tunisian final stitch of row 2. So do it in the usual way, work it under both loops. So identify those loops on the side and work under both of them. So that's stitch number 2. Stitches 3 and 4 are worked into the next 2 stitches along the baseline, which, as you recall, was row 1 of this wedge. And then the return pass, yarn over, pull through 2, and do that until you have 2 stitches remaining, and then change color. Back to color B. Just pick it up from where you dropped it behind the work and finish the return pass by yarning over and pulling through 2. Now row 4 is 6 stitches. This is number 3, number 4. So the third last stitch of these rows is always worked into the Tunisian final stitch from the row before, and then pick up an additional 2 stitches from row 1, which is sort of like the baseline of our wedge. And then the return pass, yarn over, pull through 2, remembering to stop when you have 2 stitches remaining. Don't keep going, so that you can change colors and complete the return pass with the new color, so color A. So you probably see the pattern. We're increasing by 2 stitches with every successive row. Split the yarn there. The third last stitch is always worked into the Tunisian final stitch. Now, a note here, because we're working modified return passes, those Tunisian stitches are slanted and tight, those Tunisian final stitches. So there's a reason for that. We prefer them to be that way because then we don't leave gaps in the fabric as we move down over these steps of our short rows. So it is preferable to work a modified return pass in this project. But if you find those stitches too difficult to work, you can work a conventional return pass where you chain 1 at the beginning. It doesn't really matter. It just creates a slightly messier look in the fabric. So here I am working stitch number 8 of row 6. There's 9 and 10 worked into the baseline, and then the modified return pass. So these rows are forward pass short rows, and what that means is that we are leaving unworked stitches on the forward pass, and our return passes are always full or complete, so we work all the way back to the beginning. Of course, with the caveat that we leave 2 stitches unworked so that we can change colors. But our return passes are full, our forward passes are short rows. So here we are starting the return pass without working all of the stitches. Wedges numbers 1 to 5 are all worked in this exact same way. So you will work each successive row 2 stitches longer than the row before, and row 12, the last row of each wedge, consists of 22 forward pass stitches, and then you will work a full return pass back to the beginning. So that will complete each wedge. That should be completed in, if you've done everything correctly, in color B, so white for me, and that is where each wedge ends. The next wedge will start with a full row in which you work all 24 of our stitches, so you end up with 25 stitches on the hook. That is row 1, and it creates sort of the long baseline of each of these wedges. So like I said, wedges 1 to 5, our first 5 semicircle wedges are all worked identically. So eventually I will skip ahead and let you complete this wedge off camera, and I'll do the same. I will put the instructions on the screen for this entire wedge type. I sometimes call this a conventional or a forward pass wedge. And here are the instructions. So what I want you to do is either pause this or take a screenshot and meet me when you have finished this entire wedge and you're well underway with row 1 of the next wedge. So row 1 of wedge 2. So here I've completed not all of it, but some of it. here's how you count rows. This slanted color A1 at the bottom is row 1, and then count up to row 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 will be a color B row at the end, and that's your last row. It was 22 stitches long. Now we're working in color A, the first row of the next wedge, so wedge number 2. So this is stitch number 22 going into the Tunisian final stitch. Stitch number 23 goes into the next stitch of row 1 of wedge 1. Then we are going to skip the Tunisian final stitch that would be natural to work into next, and instead we're going to work into the marked space. The marked space is simply the Tunisian final stitch of row 1, wedge 1. And we're going to work all 5 of our first wedges, the last stitch of row 1, into that space instead of into the sort of corresponding Tunisian final stitch. So here I will show you that. This is wedge 3, row 1. So we finished 2 wedges and we're starting our third wedge. We're working row 1, which is our 24 stitch full row. Stitch number 22 goes into the Tunisian final stitch of the row before, which is of course row 12 of wedge 2. This is stitch number 23 going into the next stitch. And then I'll show you where you might be tempted to work the final 24th stitch. Normally we would work it into the Tunisian final stitch that's next along the line, okay? So I'm just showing myself grabbing those 2 loops, but I'm actually not going to work that because I want you to skip this Tunisian final stitch and go back into the marked space. So go right down and work into the Tunisian final stitch of row 1 of wedge 1, which is where the marker is. You don't have to use the marker if you think you can figure out where that space is. It's not rocket science, but I put the marker there just to make sure you know. Then work the return pass as usual. And I will show you that one more time for row 1 of wedge 4. So once you've completed wedge 1, work all of your short rows, complete the wedge. So here is row 1 of wedge 4. This is stitch number 22 of this row going into the Tunisian final stitch. Stitch number 23 goes into the next stitch. Now this starts to become a little bit distorted, but just make sure you identify that stitch by maybe running it up from the rows below. So that's number 23, and then number 24, we're going to skip the Tunisian final stitch of row 1 of the current wedge, wedge 4, and instead we're going to work it into row 1 of the very first wedge. And what this does is it sort of draws the tips or the pointy ends of wedges 1 to 5 together so that they sort of radiate out from this central space like spokes on a tire. It avoids us having to sew the tips closed at the end, and it makes things look nice and neat. And there is a yarn tail available there so that at the end of the project you can use that yarn tail to cinch that space tight. So here I do that. And you can do that at the end of the project. So here I have completed wedges 1 to 5. I'm counting them. This is number 3, number 4, and number 5. And wedge 5 ended on row 12, which was a 22 stitch row worked in color B, and there it is at the top. So of course we did leave 2 stitches unworked in that last row of wedge 5. And we're going to work those in wedge 6. So now wedge 6, as I mentioned, is an unconventional wedge. It's different from numbers 1 to 5. It is worked backwards, and we're going to now learn how to work return pass short rows. And it's this backward wedge that creates the oval shape. So let's do most of wedge 6 together. It's not complicated, it's just a slightly new way of doing things. So row 1 is, as for the previous wedges, 24 stitches long, so we're going to work the forward pass all the way to the end. But when we get to the end, we are no longer going to work our last 24th stitch of row 1 into the marked space. We no longer want to cinch our sort of wedges together into that semicircle because we're not working a semicircle anymore. We're working the long middle wedge of the placemat. So here's stitch number 22 going into the Tunisian final stitch from row 12 of wedge 5. As always, number 23 just goes into the next vertical bar. But instead of working into the marked space, and you can even remove the marker at this point, or you can leave it in, we will use that space one more time. because we're now trying to create sort of a horizontal edge along the middle of our placemat, we will just start working things in the usual way where we work into the next stitch, which is the Tunisian final stitch from row 1 of the previous wedge. So there's nothing special here. We're just kind of doing the usual thing. Make sure you have 25 loops on the hook if you're not sure, and then start the return pass. Now this is going to be an incomplete return pass. We're going to leave 2 return pass stitches unworked at the end. You can count if you want. We're going to work a total of 21 iterations of the return pass. So yarn over, pull through 2 21 times, but you don't have to count, and I'll show you why. Every time we do this, we're going to stop with 4 stitches of the current color on the hook. Then we change colors, complete the return pass by yarning over, pulling through 2, and we create this situation where we have 2 stitches and then 1 stitch of the current color. So let's do it again. The next row is 2 stitches shorter, so it's going to be 22 stitches long. But again, you don't have to count because all you're doing on the forward pass is working all the way to the end. The forward passes are not short rows, so you work all the way to the end and then just work a conventional Tunisian final stitch into the Tunisian final stitch of the row before. It will be 22 stitches, but if you're pretty sure you know what you're doing, you don't really need to count. So there's the 21st stitch, and then the 22nd stitch should go into the Tunisian final stitch from the row before in the usual way. So we'll work that. Then we will work 19 iterations of the return pass. You don't have to count. We are going to stop when there are 4 stitches. So I'm just showing where not to work, okay? So we're trying to create a nice horizontal or vertical line here along the middle edge of our placemat. So work the return pass until there are 4 stitches of the current color, so color B, remaining on the hook. That is much easier in my mind than remembering to count. We're not used to counting return pass iterations, so to me it's not intuitive to do that. So just stop when you have 4 color B stitches on the hook. Then change colors and complete the return pass by working 1 more iteration, yarn over, pull through 2 with the new color, and you see how we're creating this alternating pattern of 2 stitches of each color. Then the next forward pass is 2 stitches shorter because we've left 2 stitches unworked. So work all the way to the end. It happens to be 20 stitches, but I don't recommend counting. You're less likely to make a mistake if you just work all the way to the end. So stitch number 20 should land in the Tunisian final stitch, and then work a modified return pass 17 times or until you have 4 stitches remaining on the hook in the current color. So that would be pink or color A. So here we have 4 remaining. Drop that yarn, pick up color B, complete the return pass, and you should have 2, 2, 2, and 2, and then 1 of the current color. And then work the forward pass. Now we have 18 stitches, so it decreases by 2 every time. (17) and 18 worked into the Tunisian final stitch. And modified return pass, 15 iterations this time, or just stop when you have 4 color B stitches remaining at the right end of your hook. So here is the full instructions for wedge 6. You're just going to continue this, and I'd like you to either put it on pause or take a screenshot, whatever you need to do, and meet me when you have finished row 10. So you've finished the row that has 6 stitches. Okay, so there's me finishing the return pass of row 10 and starting row 11. Row 11 is 4 stitches long. So we're going to work these last couple together because they're a little bit more confusing. So there's 4 stitches. We're just going to work one iteration of the return pass before changing colors, because you see we have 4 colors or 4 stitches left in that color. Finish the return pass, and then we're going to work the final row, row 12, which is a very short row. It's just 2 Tunisian stitches. So here's the first one going in. There it is. And then the second stitch is just worked into the Tunisian final stitch. It's a little awkward because the color A yarn is sort of coming out from between the loops of that stitch. So just get it out of the way and work a Tunisian final stitch. So that's it. Now we are going to, for row 12, work all the way back in the return pass, but we're going to do it in a special way. As you can see here, we have left stitches unworked on our return pass, and that creates gaps in the fabric. So after every 2 stitches of the same color, there's a gap, and that is where we kind of turned around and left stitches unworked on our return pass. We want to close that gap in the fabric, and the way we're going to do it is every time we encounter it, we're going to pick up a stitch from the row before as we work the return pass. And we're going to do that all the way down. So start by working a normal iteration, yarn over, pull through 2. Then remove that working stitch from the hook and use the hook to pick up the stitch from the row before, below the right hand stitch, okay? And that creates 2 crossed stitches. Put that loop back on, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. Then work one normal return pass iteration by yarning over and pulling through 2. So then we do the weird one again. So take the active loop off, use the hook to pick up the stitch from the row before directly below that right hand loop, put the loop back on, yarn over, pull through all 3. And then work one normal go. So yarn over, pull through 2, and then do a weird one. So we're doing these weird ones on the stitch before each gap, if that makes sense. So that if you have to put the project down or you just forget where you are, it is always the second stitch of each color grouping or the stitch before the gap that you work together with the stitch from the row before. So that's where we want to pull up a stitch from the previous row to close the gap in the fabric. So here, yarn over, pull through 3, then yarn over, pull through 2. And on this row, we do work a total of 24 return pass iterations. So here I'm just going to show you the stitches that we want to work together with a stitch from the row before to create these 2 crossed stitches. So it's the second stitch of each color, the rightmost. So that one, the second stitch of these 2 white ones, etc. Just in case you get lost, because we are only doing this every second time. So there's a normal, and then we want to work this next one together with the stitch from the row before. So there's the gap, and it's the stitch to the left of that gap that we want to work together with the stitch from the row below. So hopefully that is clear, and we will finish this row with one return pass iteration that is normal, and then we will change colors as usual. So there's our normal return pass iteration. Now stop here. Unfortunately, this wedge was worked backwards, so we end up abandoning color A on the other side of the placemat. So we have to, unfortunately, cut the yarn and reintroduce it on the other side. We only have to do this twice in the project, at the end of wedge 6 and then at the edge of the similarly worked wedge 13. So just cut the yarn, leaving a long enough tail to weave in later, put our stitches back on, and finish the return pass by looping color A over the hook and reintroducing it. Pull it through those last 2 loops. And then everything is a bit fiddly because it's loose, but just keep it snug down. Now we are going to work 4 even rows, simply to elongate the placemat. So that just means we're going to work 4 full rows, 24 stitches long, all the way over and all the way back. Nothing fancy. And the reason is just, if you don't do this, you end up with kind of a short, stubby oval, I guess. You don't have to work these 4 rows, but I think it looks a little better if you do. The only thing to remember is that on the first one, make sure you work those 2 crossed stitches that we created using our unusual return pass together as one loop. So don't work those separately, then you'll end up with more stitches than you're supposed to have. So every time you encounter crossed stitches, work them together as if they were one loop. And it's worthwhile running in your head as you go along here, cross stitches, single stitch. 2 crossed stitches, single stitch, because they alternate like that, and that way you'll know when to expect the cross stitches and you'll make sure that you pick them both up. You don't just want to work under one of them. So this is a full row again, 24 stitches. There's number 23, and number 24 once again is worked into the Tunisian final stitch in the usual way. And then the return pass is worked normally. Just disregard that marker. I don't know why I put that on. It was a mistake, and eventually it will disappear. You do not need to place a marker there. Just work a modified return pass back to the beginning until you have 2 stitches remaining and change colors as usual. And you're going to work a total of 4 of these extra rows. So we've just completed 1. Off camera, I want you to work another 3. So pause the video and catch up with me when you've worked a total of 3 more even rows, just back and forth, 24 stitches per row. So there's row 1 finished. Now I've worked 3. The 4th one should be in color B, so you should now be changing colors at the end of it to color A. And now we're ready to work wedge 7. Wedge 7 is worked exactly the same as wedges 1 to 5. So we're going back to our conventional forward pass short rows. Row 1 is a full row, once again, where we work all the way to the end, 24 stitches. So I'm doing that now. It should start in color A if you've done everything correctly. Every wedge always starts with color A and ends with color B. And because we are now working the second semicircle of our placemat, we are going to start doing the thing again where we place a marker and we work into that marked space instead of the last Tunisian final stitch of each row or of each wedge. And so we only worry about this on the row 1s of each wedge. So here we'll place the marker on the Tunisian final stitch of row 1 of wedge 7. So just under the 2 loops, which is where you would normally work that Tunisian final stitch. And there's our marker. And then continue the return pass back to the beginning. As always, changing colors when there are 2 stitches of the return pass remaining. So row 2, as you recall, of this type of wedge is your first short row. So it's just 2 stitches long, then work the modified return pass, stopping when you have 2 stitches left and changing colors. Row 3 is 4 stitches long. So the first 2 worked into the previous row, the Tunisian final stitch included there. This second one is always just so tight. Like in row 3, I don't know why. It's really difficult to work, but then work 2 additional stitches from row 1 and then the return pass. So hopefully you remember how to work these rows and you can work wedges 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 on your own. I am just going to show you working row 1 of wedge 8. So meet me at row 1 of wedge 8. Just to remind you of the fact that we're working not into the Tunisian final stitch, but into the Tunisian final stitch of the first wedge. So this is just stitch number 22, work it as usual into the Tunisian final stitch of the previous row, then stitch number 23, and then we're going to work into the marked space. So just remember that at the edge, or at the end of row 1 of wedges 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, just work into that marked space, instead of working it into the Tunisian final stitch of row 1 of the previous wedge. We go all the way back to row 1 of wedge 7 every time. All right, so here I have worked all the way to wedge 12. So I've worked 6 of these conventional semicircle forward pass short row wedges. I finished on row 12, which is our 22 stitch row, worked in color B, And now we are ready to do wedge 13. So row 1 of wedge 13 is 24 stitches long. You go all the way to the end, and we are going to start again working our return pass short rows. So this is just like wedge number 6. It's identical. So row 1 goes all the way to the end, and stitch 24 is worked into the Tunisian final stitch of the row before. So we are no longer going to use that marked space, which is sort of the apex of our semicircle or the center spoke of our semicircle. Instead, we're going to start creating that like vertical line going up. So don't work into there, work into the Tunisian final stitch in the more conventional way. Don't skip that. And in that way, we will create the center seam of our placemat, which will be sewn into the side of wedge 6. Okay, so this is just like wedge 6. We're going to do only 21 return pass iterations here, leaving 4 stitches unworked in color A. So stop with 4 stitches remaining and then just complete the return pass so that we actually are leaving 2 return pass stitches unworked. And we do that in every row. So this forward pass of row 2 consists of 22 simple stitches, and that should bring us to the very end. So I keep saying this, but I do not count anything on these wedges. I just work to the end on the forward pass, finishing with the Tunisian final stitch. So this is the second last one, number 21. This is number 22, going into the Tunisian final stitch on the edge. Then work a modified return pass until there are 4 stitches remaining on the left of your hook in the current color, which is color B. So 4 white stitches, that's when you stop, finish the return pass with the new color, and then carry on with the next row, starting with the forward pass going all the way to the end. Now I'm going to make a point here about the possibility of joining as you go so that you don't have to sew the center seam of the placemat. If you wanted to, and the PDF does include brief instructions for this, at the end of each row, like when you get to the center seam, so at the end of the forward pass, when you work into the Tunisian final stitch, as I'm just about to here, you could slip stitch that to the corresponding sort of chain on the edge of wedge number 6. And I will show doing that a few times at the end of this wedge, or at the end of the next section, which is where we work the 4 even rows. But the reason why I'm not showing it all the way along here is because I just decided that whip stitching that center seam is really not a big deal. It looks fine. So here are just the instructions to complete row 13. So meet me at the end of row 10, which is your 6th simple stitch row, and we will work rows 11 and 12 together. So there's me finishing row 11, row 10 I mean, and this is row 11. 4 stitches long, so 4 simple stitches, the 4th one worked into the Tunisian final. And this row only has 1 return pass iteration. So yarn over and pull through 2 just once, and then that completes it. Don't do it again because there are 4 stitches there of our pink color, so we're done. Change colors to finish the return pass. And then we have our alternating 2, 2, and 2. And then we work our last row, which is just 2 Tunisian stitches. So row 12 is just TSS 2, 1, and then 2. The number 2 goes into the Tunisian final stitch on the edge. It's again awkward because the color A that we're going to abandon at the end of this return pass is in the way. So now work our special return pass where we close the gaps in the fabric by working stitches from the row before. So one normal iteration, remove the loop, pick up the extra loop from the row before, and pull through all three. So hopefully you remembered how to do this from wedge number 6. And work those special crossed stitches every second time. So always in between work one normal return pass iteration where you just yarn over and pull through 2 in the usual way. Now here you might notice that those 2 crossed stitches kind of came uncrossed from one another. That's totally fine. It doesn't affect the final look, and in fact, after blocking, presumably those stitches do get uncrossed from one another. It doesn't affect the look. All we're trying to do here is pull up a stitch from the row before and work it into our return pass so that we close the gap in the fabric, but it doesn't matter if those stitches remain crossed over one another. Just be careful that when we start the next forward pass, that you remember that those 2 stitches are supposed to be worked together as one loop. Don't be tempted to work them separately because they've kind of separated from one another. So that's why when we start the next row, it's worthwhile keeping in mind 1 stitch and then 2 cross stitches work together and sort of alternate that in your mind so you know what you're doing. So at the end of this return pass with 2 stitches remaining, we have to go and retrieve our abandoned color A from the other end once more. That's the last time we'll have to do that. And finish the return pass for row 12 by just yarning over and pulling through those last 2 stitches with color A. All right, so now we're ready to work, remember, those 4 even extra rows to lengthen our placemat a bit. If you worked those on the other side, you definitely have to work them here. And there I'm just reminding myself because it's really hard to tell with my footage after the fact where I am in the pattern because these rows are all identical. So remember to work your cross stitches as 1 stitch. So there's 1 normal stitch and then 2 crossed stitches, and just alternate that in this first row, making sure that you don't work them separately and that you make sure you do get your hook under both of them every time. So those ones are clearly crossed. Yeah, these ones are not. So these are the 2 that came uncrossed. Just make sure you grab both of them and work them both together. That's all. So this is row 1 of our extra rows. We are going to work most of these 4 extra rows together this time because like I said, I'm going to use them to demonstrate how you might attach as you go to the other side of your placemat. So there's the Tunisian final stitch at the end. Work it in the usual way. Make sure you have 25 loops on the hook at this point, and then work the modified return pass back and stop when you have 2 stitches remaining and change colors as usual. So that's our extra row number 1 completed. Now just take a break here. I've started the next one and I've completed it almost all the way to the end in color B there. And I'm taking a break and I want to show you how this is just me kind of, because we haven't been doing this all along, I sort of have to line the stitches up, so pink with pink, white with white, just to kind of predict where we would start attaching if we did want to demonstrate attaching these together just a couple of times at the end here. So I'm just lining the stitches up. If you had done this from the beginning, you wouldn't need to do this. So basically, the option exists to slip stitch the Tunisian final stitch at the end of these rounds together with a stitch along the edge of the other side, which is actually wedge 6 technically. So I'm just going to finish the second extra row in color B. So here's number 23 and then stitch number 24. Just stick the hook under the 2 loops of the Tunisian final stitch, but don't work it yet. Identify the corresponding chain, and you can work under both loops of that chain. Zoom in a bit, but I don't recommend doing that. I recommend just sort of the outer or top loop of that chain on the, just, you know, where it corresponds on the other side, and then just work all of this together in a slip stitch. So yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. So pull through that chain and pull through the 2 loops of the Tunisian final stitch all in one. Then work the return pass in the usual way, yarn over, pull through 2 until you get to the final 2 stitches as normal. So that was row 2 of our extra 4 rows that we're working here back and forth. And so I am going to show you that again for row 3 because I wanted, so that's just to remind myself that that's 2 extra rows completed. So now we're going to start row 3. Row 3 should be in color A. And again, it's just 24 stitches down the line working evenly. And when we get to the Tunisian final stitch, we will just insert the hook under the 2 loops of the Tunisian final stitch. Things are a bit distorted because being attached to the other side of the placemat just in this one place kind of pulls everything tight. But here I'm going to dig it out. It's the Tunisian final stitch from the previous row, so it's a white stitch because we're currently working a pink row. Okay, so I'm going to find those 2 loops of my last, their Tunisian final stitch, and just pick them up on the hook, but don't work them yet. Find the corresponding chain on the other side of the placemat and just insert into that chain and then yarn over and work them all together in a slip stitch. And then work the return pass in the usual way, all the way back to the beginning. So that's extra row number 3. Change colors at the end. And that's row 3 completed. So I'll start extra, yeah, there we go. So I'll start extra row number 4. It should be in color B, and we're going to work it the exact same way. Here I am at the end of it, working under the 2 loops of the Tunisian final stitch, and then just finding the corresponding chain on the other side of the placemat and inserting into that, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops, and then start the return. Whoops, I split it, but then start the return pass, yarn over and pull through 2 and go back to the beginning. So that is extra row number 4 in our little lengthening rectangle that we work at the end of rows or wedges 6 and 13. Okay, so that's 4 finished. Now we're going to start wedge 14. This is our final wedge, and the good news is that it is worked exactly the same as wedges 1 to 5 and 7 to 12. It's another semicircle wedge. So I'm going to work the first few stitches of it, and then I'm going to just kind of orient you to where we are in the overall placemat so that you can see what we're doing here. So the first row is going to be a full row where we work all the way to the end, 24 stitches. But before we complete that, I'll just show you where we are. So we've kind of attached the last part of our center seam together awkwardly. We are still going to have to do some sewing there later. It's not a problem. Then we can kind of roll things around. Here are our first, that's like number 1 there that I'm holding on to. There's just enough room for 1 more conventional wedge. Now I just want to point out that this here is actually wedge number 5, okay? It is not clearly demarcated from wedge 6 because of the way we worked it, but that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, okay? So we have 1 stitch remaining. So we have a total of 6 semicircle wedges on each end. So we'll just finish row 1 of wedge 14, which again is a full row all the way to the end. And I do recommend working stitch 24, so the last stitch of this row, into that first marked space into which we worked the row 1s of wedges 1 to 5. I took the marker off, but it is super obvious because we worked so many row 1s. So skip that final Tunisian stitch there, that's white, and go back and find this kind of center point here, okay? It's really obvious because we've worked so many row 1s into it. It should be in color A, like a semicircle of color A. All of our stitch 24s of row 1s were worked into that one space. It's probably gaping open. You can always tighten it. But that's where we're going to work stitch number 24 instead of the Tunisian final stitch that would otherwise we would logically do. It's not super important to do this. You can always just sew that hole together at the end, but I find it makes a nice, neat point to your semicircle center, and it doesn't require sewing if you work into that space once again. Then work your return pass back to the beginning, and that's row 1 of wedge 14. Then, of course, as we recall, row number 2 is our first short row consisting of just 2 stitches. Okay, so stitch number 1 and stitch number 2 in color B, and then a return pass, changing colors at the end of the return pass. Row 3 just has 4 stitches. Row 4 has 6 stitches, again always working the third last one of each row into the Tunisian final stitch from the row before, and then grabbing 2 extra stitches from row 1. So I will leave you to complete this wedge on your own. It is worked again the exact same way as all the other semicircle wedges. So here I have finished row 12, which is our 22 stitch row, leaving 2 stitches unworked in the middle there. I'm just going to finish the row 12 return pass in color B. And you don't have to change colors here, you're done. This is where we will complete wedge 14. Cut the yarn, leaving just a tail long enough to do an invisible join and then weave it in. So this top row here is kind of unfinished. We don't really have to sort of cast it off or finish it in any way. Grab color A, which is coming out of the project in the same vicinity. Cut it, leaving maybe a 30 centimeter yarn tail, something like that, and thread it onto a tapestry needle, because we're going to use color A to sew our seam between wedges 1 and wedges 14. This is a really cool technique that I did not invent. We're going to ignore the outermost stitch because we're going to join that at the end with that white yarn in an invisible join. And instead we're going to start by working under the horizontal bars that are just your vertical bars. They're your Tunisian stitches. So we're going to skip that one on the very edge, and we're going to work these bars together. We're going to sew them together. And we're going to do it in such a way that this extra bit of fabric here, consisting of our starting chain, is going to kind of flip around to the back and become hidden because it's surplus to requirements. We don't want that showing in the fabric. So start by simply finding an anchor point on the back of your left wedge. So I'm going to be calling number 1 your left wedge. So just anchor yourself so that you're on the right side of this project here, just anywhere in the back there near the top. Then we're going to come through the fabric from back to front at a point that is just to the left of that starting chain. I'm going to find a better spot there. No, try again. There we go. There's a natural hole there just above the first vertical or horizontal bar, but to the left of the chain. And so we're going to come through that point, and I'm going to do that many more times, so you'll see. Then we're going to come into the horizontal bar from top to bottom on the left, and then we're going to find the corresponding horizontal bar, so the second one in from the edge, and do the same thing, top to bottom behind that bar with the needle. And then just kind of pull that slightly snug. Then we're going to go back into the left wedge in the exact same spot that we came out, but we're going to go below the horizontal bar this time. So we've kind of snagged that right horizontal bar, and then we pull it snug. And it's so cool. The chain disappears, and we end up creating these overlapping horizontal bars that are very similar to what is in the fabric. So that's the repeat. Let's do it again. So back to front through the fabric, find that natural hole to the left of the chain above the next horizontal bar. Then go down through that horizontal bar top to bottom, and then the corresponding one on the other side, same thing, top to bottom. Make sure that you just go below your working yarn when you do that. Anyone who sews will know to do that automatically. Then go back through the same hole but below that same horizontal bar. You see how we've kind of used our working yarn to snag or wrap around that right wedge bar, so we just pull that snug. So pull that all the way through to the back. The chain disappears and it looks really neat. So back to front through that space, top to bottom down through the left horizontal bar, and then the right corresponding horizontal bar, and then back through the fabric in the same spot that we came through, but below the horizontal bar and then pull it snug. And you want to pull it quite snug here. You feel almost like a pop when you get things into the right position, but it's quite snug. So back to front, above the bar, go down behind the bar, do the same thing on the other side, going under the loops of your working fabric or working yarn there, and then back into that same space, but this time below the horizontal bar, and pull it snug. So if you're not sure that you're pulling it snug enough, then maybe halfway through the seam, you might just want to stop and kind of lie the project flat on a table and just pull the yarn quite snug. And I will show myself doing that in a minute. So I'm going to put a link in the description to the lady who taught me this really cool way of sewing two edges of Tunisian crochet together. I just think it's brilliant. You're not actually seeing the working yarn that you're using because it's all kind of hidden, and that's why we pull it really tight. It is a bit of a lengthy procedure. The center seam along the middle of the placemat, we're just going to whip stitch, so it's much faster. But I don't know of any way of doing this without sewing. There's really no way you could join these together as you go, I don't think. At least no way that would look decent. So I have seen some people with edges like this solve the problem of the extra starting chain by doing a provisional starting chain with scrap yarn and then doing the thing where you kind of remove that at the end. And I actually tried doing it that way, but I found that on the right side of the fabric, it looked a little messier when I did that. I didn't like it as much. It probably looks better on the back because on the back of this seam, we do have a ridge that you can see and feel from the extra fabric created by our starting chain. But because you can't see it at all in the front and it looks a bit neater this way on the front, I just don't do the provisional thing. I just keep the starting chain and just sort of force it around to the back of the fabric, and I'm pretty happy with the result. This placemat is not reversible really, so I don't really care what it looks like on the wrong side. So here I'm going to take a break a little more than halfway, and I'm just going to pull just to make sure that these are all nice and snug. And again, you can feel this and see this ridge that is mostly made up of the starting chain in the back, but it is totally invisible from the front, so I'm pretty happy with how this looks. It's pretty seamless. And then at the end, you will just do an invisible join using that white yarn tail at the top. So I've finished that now. I've gotten back to the center of the semicircle, and because I worked a few iterations of like joining these together at the top there, I just thread the yarn back to where we need to now seam the center seam. So I'm doing this with whip stitch. I'm just going into the outer loops or the bottom loop of the bottom fabric and the top loop of the top fabric, if that makes sense. And you should be sewing together like pink with pink and white with white, and leaving the center arms of these chains along the edge untouched so that they're kind of nice and visible from the front. And of course, we have folded this with the right sides facing and the wrong sides facing out. So this takes 2 seconds. So like I said, I'm not sure that it's worth doing that slightly difficult process of joining as you go. I did include it in the written instructions, but you can choose whether to bother with that or not. I mean, it doesn't look too bad. I think it's acceptable. Once this is blocked, I think it's good enough. Now I do have a little bit of a funny sticking out thing there. I will sew that in at the end with that yarn tail, but otherwise this is looking pretty good. I just want to point out one thing here. With regards to those 4 even rows, those 24 stitch rows that we worked to elongate the placemat, on the left side here of this example is where I worked it as I gave you the instructions in the pattern. So it is after wedge 6, but you can also work them after wedge 7. And here's what that looks like. They sort of blend in. So here they're clearly demarcated when you work them after wedge 6. You can clearly see them on both sides of the placemat if you work it the same way on both sides. But over here, you can see that if you work them after wedge 7, they kind of blend in. So that rectangular area just isn't as clearly demarcated. The 4 rows there blend in with wedge 7. So here on the left, I've worked them after wedge 7, and on the right in the blue example, I've worked them after wedge 6, which is the instructions I've given. So you can choose which way you want to go. Here's a quick border that you can work if you want to. I'm using a regular crochet hook in a 5mm size, and I'm going to work it under just the sort of top or outer loop of our chain that runs around the placemat. So just this top loop here, I think it looks a little better, but you can work it under both loops if you prefer. So just slip stitch your yarn in place and start by working a chain 2. So chain twice, double crochet into the same stitch that you attach to. Skip 1 stitch along the baseline here, along the outer edge of your placemat, and work a slip stitch into the next stitch. And that's the repeat. So just repeat that around. Chain 2, double crochet into the same space, skip 1 stitch, and slip stitch into the next stitch. And you just repeat that all the way around and then join at the end. It's very simple, very quick, and I think it looks really cute on this particular pattern. Oh, the cat is in effect here. Sorry about that. So yeah, just repeat that simple repeat all the way around for a nice cute border. So that is this project. You can work any other border you want, fan stitch. I have lots of borders on my other placemats if you want to check them out on YouTube or on my website. Once again, there is a link in the description to get the free PDF for this project and to check out my website. Thank you for watching.